Okay, hello, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Michael Otum. I'm at the Department of Life Sciences at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad. I want to talk to you today about, a series of lectures which I'm going to put up on YouTube. First one is looking at biofuels and tropical forests. I want to talk about how biofuels can be seen to influence biodiversity in tropical forests. I want to take a look and see whether biofuels are going to be a good thing for biodiversity conservation or a bad thing for biodiversity conservation in the tropics. So I want to take a look at three types of biofuels. First of all, woody biofuels. Woody biofuels are things like basically firewood, and that's basically what tropical forests have been used for millennia by humans. And I want to take a look at how it's been used in the past and how it's affected tropical biodiversity in the past. Secondly, I want to take a look at first generation biofuels. First generation biofuels are those biofuels which have been used to generate fuel or produce fuel mainly from previously existing agricultural systems, and they're the first type of biofuels which have been capitalized on almost opportunistically after the first oil shock. And I want to take a look at how production of these first generation biofuels will affect biodiversity, and this has a global implication because we're talking about global climate change as well as an immediate impact on tropical biodiversity. And finally, I want to take a look at second generation biofuels. These are the next wave of biofuels. Maybe in the future, it really depends on whether technology is sorted out for these biofuels to be used. And they have certain benefits which the first generation biofuels do not. Primarily, I guess, not impinging upon human food production systems and therefore not forcing up the prices of foods which are produced in the tropics. So, moving right along. First of all, I want to take a look at woody biofuels. Now, woody biofuels are, as I said, firewood or fuel wood, and it's something which humans have been using tropical forests for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And generally, it's a sustainable use if human populations are low enough so that the extraction of these fuel woods are low enough for the further production of the woody biomass to be balanced. So, in other words, if we have a low enough density of people, their needs of fuel woods are low enough so it comes in under or at the same amount of the amount of woody biomass which is produced each year by these tropical forests. And generally you'll find different populations of humans, usually hunter and gatherer type populations living in or adjacent to tropical forests, which are in balance with the productivity of these tropical forests in balance with their fuel wood needs. And so their populations and their extraction of fuel woods have been sustainable through millennia. Things change, however, if human populations begin to change. If human populations get too large, then there is too much woody matter or too much woody material taken out of those forests for the amount of productivity in those forests to sustain. And when that happens, you will start to get opening up of the canopy. You'll start to get degradation of those forests, and those forests will begin to decline. They will begin to degrade, they will begin to decay, and other processes may take over then, which will degrade them further and lead to deforestation and the disappearance of these forests. And how can human populations become too large? Well, generally through natural processes if cultural practices which may be in place to keep human populations at a lower level fail in some way, the human populations will become too large and they will make too many demands on the forests around them. And another way is that sedentarization, through the process of sedentarization, populations which are traditionally nomadic may be sedentarized when the central government entices them to stay in one spot and therefore make them more manageable by providing things like healthcare and education for their kids in a central location. They'll provide teachers and hospitals and doctors and so on in these particular localities. So the people will no longer shift around and spread their impact across a large area. Instead, they will stay in one spot and therefore degrade the forest around the area in which they're located. So that process of sedentarization will also induce a decline and degradation and decay of forests, tropical forests in the world, with a subsequent decay in biodiversity. So, woody biofuels and conservation. Firewood extraction from tropical forest is still very important around the world, mainly in the least developed countries. In Africa, it's estimated that over 90% of the woody material removed from tropical forests is used as firewood. And tropical forests, one of the biggest roles that they play in human society is production of firewood. This comes from that FAO report that I've posted up online in my learning, so go and take a read of that. Other more developed countries such as Brazil and maybe Indonesia have used fuel wood or woody biofuels in the industrial applications. So you can look at, hang on a minute, sorry about that, and yes, I was talking about industrial production of woody biofuels in places like Brazil. Brazil has converted large areas of forest in the Amazon basin to plantation, fast-growing eucalypts, for instance, and they harvest these eucalypts and reduce them to charcoal and use that charcoal in iron smelting, for instance. I think some aluminium smelters are also running in the Amazon basin using this form of energy. Okay, but that is relatively rare. It's more in places like Brazil and Indonesia. Plantations are used to reduce reliance on natural ecosystems and also to increase the predictability and the ability of an area to produce woody biofuels which are just right for the purpose in industrial contexts. Plantations can also be used in allowing subsistence fuel wood users to to lessen their impact on tropical forests, because this large use of woody biofuels in Africa comes at a cost to tropical forests. It does lead to forest degradation and biodiversity loss. Much of the deforestation and forest degradation in tropical Africa does come from gathering of firewood and so on. Plantations have been used in the past. Apparently in Ethiopia, the capital, Addis Ababa, had to move around a lot before eucalypts were planted and allowed the capital to remain in one spot, because the people now could use these eucalypt plantations to harvest the timber so that they had fuel to use in their cooking fires and so on. So harvesting of woody biofuels can lead to degradation of tropical forests, and this can contribute to changes in the global carbon cycle. the use of woody biofuels, if it's sustainable, if it's balanced by the productivity of the tropical forest, does not lead to degradation and does not lead to increases in global atmospheric carbon, and therefore does not contribute to global climate change. However, when things go out of balance now and you get more woody stuff burnt than is actually produced, then you'll get contributions to the global climate imbalance, and you will get a build-up of carbon and therefore contributions to global warming. So in that way, woody biofuels and harvesting of woody biofuels in an unsustainable manner can contribute to biodiversity loss and change. Let's look at woody biofuels in the Caribbean now. In the past, woody biofuels have been very important up until the 1950s, at least until around the Second World War. Charcoal was the main form of domestic fuel wood use. So charcoal would be burnt in the forests and transported to homes and used there for cooking. But in the 1950s and 60s, kerosene and natural gas became the fuel of choice for use in cooking and so on. So now there is very little charcoal burning in the countries of the insular Caribbean except for Haiti. Haiti has a very large demand for charcoal because it simply cannot afford to use kerosene and natural gas for cooking and for also electricity generation. And because of that, Haiti has some of the worst record as when it comes to preserving their forest biodiversity. And I've got a YouTube link there so you can go and take a look at a documentary put together by a chap from Penn State University up in the States, looking at some of the big problems that they have in Haiti with charcoal production and conservation of biodiversity. It's a real mess there. There have been several initiatives in Haiti to try and establish plantations, timber plantations in Haiti. And some of them, I think the jury is still out on whether it's been successful or not, but I believe that it will probably take not only the ability to grow trees, but also to integrate that those plantations into the economic fabric of Haiti and move people away from reliance on charcoal, which is generated from those dwindling natural forests which are left in Haiti. Many of those are, from national parks, which are just being devastated all the time. So woody biofuels, as the example of Haiti shows, can drive natural ecosystems, natural forest ecosystems to extinction. It can be devastating for tropical forests. But if you have alternative fuels available in the form of fossil fuels, then you can be much more like the rest of the Caribbean, which still have substantial covers of forest. Trinidad has got about half its land area still covered in forest, and in many of the other islands, at least the tops of the mountains are still covered in forest, and also abandoned plantations are also recovering as well. Okay, what else do I need to say? Oh, right, so yeah, fossil fuels, however, do contribute more to global climate change. So there are swings and roundabouts, pros and cons for woody biofuels in the Caribbean, and not using woody biofuels, you do contribute more to global climate change by using those fossil fuels. All right, let's move on now to our first generation biofuels. Around about 2008, there was a big oil shock. For whatever reason, I've heard different reasons for this, but the global price of oil peaked. It spiked up There were different reasons that people have put forward for this. Speculators intervening in the market, a slow percolation through that peak oil had been passed and that the supplies of oils were beginning to dwindle. Whatever the reason, there was a big spark in oil prices, and it hasn't come down to the levels that we saw in the mid-2000s ever since. I think we were looking at levels of about $20 or $30 a barrel. It spiked up to about $120 a barrel and has come back now to around $80 and $90 per barrel. So we're looking at a big rise in oil prices, and because of that, the cost of fueling many of the different processes in human economies, such as transport, the big one, production of things like fertilizers, herbicides and so on, all combine to create a big spike in the cost of food production as well. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The spike in the oil prices meant that it became economic now to provide energy in alternative forms. Now, you've all heard of alternative forms of energy like solar power, wind power, but we also have alternative forms of energy from things like plant materials. Woody biofuels is one thing, but we can also create biofuels which can be used in the same engines, the same internal combustion engines, the same processes for making fertilizers, the same processes for making herbicides, the same transport system networks, and same trucks and the same trains and so on. So these biofuels then can plug in and they can replace, in the short term, a much higher fossil fuel as the price had spiked up. So it suddenly became very economical to use biofuels, and particular biofuels made from vegetable oil, from sugar, or from starches. Now, in the short term, and trying to capitalize on these increases, these massive increases in oil to produce a cheaper fuel which can be used and can be sold profitably, existing technology was used. And the existing technology made biofuels which could be used in the existing energy network, which were made from vegetable oil, sugar and starches, which were also produced by food production systems. So what happened was that food which was produced, things like sugarcane and soya and palm oil, now had another market. They could sell these oils, and biofuels which could be used in place of traditional oils could be produced from these food products. Now, this has two important implications for biodiversity conservation. Okay, so biofuels, main production was from sugarcane. This generally comes from Brazil, which has had very good sugarcane production, very efficient sugarcane production, and large areas to produce sugarcane. So it was in their best interest to find many different uses for sugarcane. So they had been researching sugarcane biofuels over the years, and they'd built up an energy supply industry from sugarcane biofuels over the years, and this really kicked into play and become very economic once the oil prices had peaked. Corn is another crop which is got a lot of weight behind it in terms of the food production establishment. Much of the food production in the United States is corn. So if you can convert cornstarch into biofuels, this would be a very good market for all the corn producers up in the States there. The technology is not as advanced though as it is for sugarcane. So cornstarch is still very marginal at best. Biodiesel technology is more advanced there. It comes from vegetable oils like soy, rape, jatropha, sunflower oil, palm oil. The technology is basically worked out there. Diesel engines tend to be more robust, so they can use these different types of oil. Okay, so biodiesel is also used. Now, one of the main things which influence biodiversity conservation and how biofuels will influence biodiversity conservation is that these traditional food crops like sugarcane and soy and palm oil are grown in tropical forest biomes. So if you have another use for these food products, it's going to increase the demand for these food products, and this increased demand is going to increase pressure to clear tropical forests and to make them more biofuel production possible. So the increased demand for biofuels will increase the pressure to clear tropical forests and hence damage biodiversity conservation. There's another way in which biofuels also can influence biodiversity conservation, and that is in influencing prices of food. If producers of food now have two ways in which two ways in which they can sell on their products, they can increase the price of their products. Okay, so if you increase the price of the products, that is going to increase the price of food. And it's no surprise then that in 2008, when the oil price spiked, the price of food also ramped up, it also spiked. And this was because not only the cost of the the production chain increased because the price of oil increased, but also because the alternatives to oil were also food. And so when that foodstuff was diverted from the traditional food chain into production of biofuels, it ramped up, increased the price of food. Okay, so this also contributed to pressures on tropical forests because more people were forced into subsistence agriculture, and they needed to have a place where they could practice subsistence agriculture, and that was the forests. So forests were cleared and degraded for more subsistence agriculture. So we had a situation where biofuels were putting more pressure on tropical forests and increasing degradation and clearing, deforestation, and therefore increasing or accelerating biodiversity loss. One of the biggest ways in which this was happening was in Southeast Asia, and clearing of tropical forests in places like Indonesia on the island of Borneo for massive oil palm plantations. These oil palm plantations became very economic because the oil palm seeds the oil extracted from the oil palm seeds could be used for biofuels as well. All right. Now, before I leave first generation biofuels, I need to talk a little bit about how they influence global climate change. If first generation biofuels are produced, then less reliance on fossil fuels is needed, and therefore less carbon is released into the atmosphere. Because remember, these first generation biofuels, the organic matter which is produced is taken from the atmosphere. So they do have a potential for slowing down global climate change by actually taking carbon from the atmosphere rather than taking it from carbon which has been sequestered away for millions of years and now is being released back into the atmosphere. Okay? However, with the increase in tropical forest degradation, which results from the demand for biofuels and also the increased demand for food, that can offset this decrease in release of carbon into the atmosphere. It'll offset it by creating a greater amount of deforestation, which is going to release more carbon into the atmosphere. Okay? If deforestation is controlled, however, biofuels, first generation biofuels, can certainly slow down global climate change. But in practice, it certainly looks like first generation biofuels increases deforestation, increases agriculture in tropical regions at the expense of tropical forests, and therefore will actually increase global climate change by increasing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Okay? So first generation biofuels actually looking like they are a problem for biodiversity conservation. They are not actually acting to make tropical forests more sustainable. All right, so that moves us on now to second generation biofuels. Second generation biofuels are basically using the byproducts of the food production system to produce the biofuels. So instead of using the food directly, taking the seeds and the oils and the carbohydrates which are used for food, instead the byproducts, the things like the bagasse from the sugarcane, the leaves and the stems and the roots for other crops which aren't currently used, they are used for the second generation biofuels. So this cellulose and lignin are digested with enzymes in big vats, and oils and alcohol are produced which can be used in the current energy chain. So these second generation biofuels are seen to be complementary to current food production systems. So you can grow a crop, produce food, and also produce biofuels from that same crop. And this is what happens with sugarcane. And actually sugarcane is a good example because quite often sugarcane and the bagasse which is produced from sugarcane is actually burnt to power the sugar refining mills in many different areas. And it's a similar sort of principle, except that bagasse would be digested, fermented, and used to produce an alcohol which could be used for biofuels in other applications, not only burning it in the sugar refining factory. So one downside of this, I mean, it seems to be quite a good system. One downside of this is that more nutrients will be taken from any food production system than previously. So previously you could take the fruits and so on from the particular food crop and then plow the rest back into the soil, which would return nutrients to the soil and therefore sustain the agroecosystem. Now if you take everything, including the other stuff which is not food, from the system, you're going to decrease the amount of nutrients. So that would need to be countered with higher costs in terms of fertilizers and so on to maintain nutrients in this sort of food production system. Another downside of secondary biofuels is that we're not too sure exactly how second generation biofuels are likely to impact upon conservation and generation of deforestation rates and so on. If second generation biofuels makes farming a lot more efficient, makes farming a lot more profitable, then this may actually mean that more forests are cleared because more people will start to get into agriculture, and so that they can make money. That wouldn't be such a great thing. Alternatively, if second generation biofuels increase the profitability for a certain number of farmers, they may need to farm less land now and so they will have less need to expand their farms, and therefore they won't need to clear more forests. But generally that tends to be a bit of a utopian view, and generally if people are making money, they will try and make more money by clearing more land, in my limited experience. So second generation biofuels, by making farming more profitable, may actually increase the pressure on tropical forests, and in the long term be bad for conservation. So second generation biofuels may be good, maybe not. We don't really know at the moment, because second generation biofuels aren't really out there at the moment. They are still a new technology. People still are not too sure exactly how second generation biofuels are going to fit into the economic system, because a lot of people aren't using it. Okay, the technology has not advanced enough for people to use it now in their agricultural systems as yet. Okay, one thing which is likely with second generation biofuels is likely to relieve food prices, at least in the short term, because you would no longer have that competition that you get with first generation biofuels between biofuels and food. Food is going to be separate from the biofuels. They're going to be using different parts of the plant, as it were. So you're much less likely to have that driving up of food prices as the different industries compete for the agricultural crop. So second generation biofuels are likely to reduce food prices, or to relieve the upward pressure on food prices, at least in the short term. And that's likely to be good for biodiversity conservation, in that it doesn't drive more people into subsistence agriculture and therefore want to clear more forests and so on. So what's up with biofuels in the Caribbean? Right, most Caribbean islands are developed enough that they can import oil and gas for their energy needs. And it's really only Haiti in the region which uses fuel wood, or woody firewood. Most islands, from Jamaica, Belize through Guyana, the majority of the population will use natural gas or kerosene. They don't use firewood anymore. It's really only Haiti where the majority of the population uses firewood. Therefore, we don't get those pressures on the forests in the majority of the Caribbean, only in Haiti. We don't get those pressures on the forests which come from firewood or fuel wood production. This may change in the future as the price of natural gas increases, but with the rise of the fracking industry, which promises to produce large amounts of fossil fuel, we may not see a rise in the natural gas price for the foreseeable future, in which case we are not likely to see the countries of the Caribbean turning to fuel woods once again. So hopefully we won't have that pressure on the remaining natural forests in the Caribbean for fuel wood production. I mean, there are plenty of other pressures on natural forests in the Caribbean. At least they won't have to deal with that particular one. Biofuel production in the Caribbean, there is a lot of potential for that, mainly because agriculture is not very strong in the Caribbean anymore. There does tend to be a lot of abandoned agricultural land, a lot of underutilized agricultural land, which could be used for biofuels. And that would be a positive thing. It could be developed, the industry could be developed without needing to clear any natural forests in the region. It would be also very beneficial in terms of global climate change by slowing down the use of fossil fuels and therefore reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, and so slowing down global warming. Biofuels would probably also supply a much needed diversification in the economies of many of the different Caribbean islands, which tend to be focused on mainly on one particular crop or tourism. If they can diversify into biofuel production as well, then that would be of benefit to the economies of these different countries. A couple of things standing against biofuel production in the Caribbean is that the areas which are farmable are generally pretty small. So you don't get those economies of scale, and mechanization of the biofuel production, in particular things like sugarcane, simply isn't economic. It's just not, it's just not economic. It's possible technically and so on, feasible, but to actually economically do it, it really does not seem to make sense. It just does not work out. For one small estate to buy a harvester and maintain it just would not be economic for that small estate. So unless there can be some centralized system of mechanization developed, it probably means that production of biofuels, at least through things like sugarcane, is probably unlikely to take off in the Caribbean. So production of biofuels in the Caribbean, as I said, may not necessarily mean that biodiversity would be lost. Unlike in other parts of the world, like Southeast Asia, we still have excess ex-agricultural land or underproductive agricultural land which could be used for biodiversity loss without impinging on the remaining natural forests. So it's definitely something which may be worth looking into, and many international agencies are trying to encourage tropical countries, particularly in the Caribbean and also Central America and so on, to research and get into biofuels. They see it as one way of diversifying economies, but also maybe even to try and conserve natural ecosystems by maybe relieving pressure from firewood gathering and cultivation. All right, so there you go, in a nutshell, biofuels, biodiversity, globally and in the Caribbean. Hope you learned something from that. Do read the 2 readings which I've posted up on My Learning. That FAO report, I don't agree with everything which they say. For instance, they're talking about how fuel wood production from forests in Trinidad is unsustainable. I don't know whether that there is a lot of fuel wood harvesting from forests in Trinidad, but the only fuel wood production that I know is from charcoal burners, and they don't really use a lot of they don't harvest a lot from tropical forests, and they've pretty much saturated the market. So read those things with a pinch of salt, but they'll give you a general idea on what the status is for biofuels in the Caribbean and also in Latin America. Okay, well, I hope you learned something from that lecture, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.